Hi, everybody. Welcome to the TBR webinar. We're going to wait just one more minute so other folks can join before we get started, so hold tight. Okay, let's get started. Welcome to the TBR webinar series. Today, myself, Patrick Heffernan, and pretty much half of my team will be discussing how hybrid ecosystems and industry clouds shape the future for consulting, IT services, and digital transformation. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of buttons which are self-explanatory. The most important one is the Q&A button to submit your questions, which we will tackle at the end of the presentation. So after the webinar, you will receive an email with a replay link as well as a link to view and register for other TBR webinars. So let's get going. As I said, I've assembled a large team today so that we could field as many questions as possible and really make it a discussion and maybe even share some dissenting views across the team. So please feel free to send a note to us as we're doing the discussion. We will do our best to go through these slides quickly so that you can get the content and then get to your questions. So we're going to frame our predictions from 2021 very broadly, and then we're going to walk through each one of our predictions in detail. So let's go ahead and start with the big picture. The text that you're seeing here, it comes directly from our prediction special report, which you can read in full off of our website. And while hybrid has been emerging for decades, the pandemic absolutely accelerated both adoption of hybrid ways of engaging and really critically the expectations that everybody brings to the table around what hybrid actually means, particularly what hybrid means for productivity and for personal interactions. And for me, I think the best way to think about the hybrid engagement model for IT services vendors and consultancies is to put your mind in the frame of hybrid in American schools as a reaction to COVID-19. So, you think about U.S. elementary school teachers, average age is over 40. They have to become more technologically adept and better at delivering lessons both to a camera and to a classroom. And while it was chaotic, and I think most people experienced less than ideal education in the springtime, by the fall, most teachers had learned how to manage both virtual breakout pods, engage virtual interactions, and the students now really appreciate the social benefits of course, being in the classroom, probably now more than they ever did. But now students really do understand that remote learning can include more depth and more detailed and even more concentrated learning process in some cases. Of course, this isn't true for all students and teachers, the same way that what I just described is not going to be true when you think about it in terms of all IT services vendors and consultancies and all their engagements. Nothing's been perfect, but what it really means is that IT services professionals and consultants can now become and have become far more adept at delivering both in person and remotely, and have made collaborative technologies just a natural extension of doing the job. And clients, the other side of that, of course, is clients now receive these services and have adopted to different ways of working, recognizing the value, the cadence, the duration of a services relationship can actually be sustained without being face-to-face. And I mean, everybody wants students back in the classroom full-time, but everyone also recognizes that on some level, all of this has really changed forever. Business travel is never going to be the same. It's as simple as that. Digital transformations are going to accelerate. Emerging technologies are going to increasingly permeate every single aspect of IT services and consulting, and we're going to see new speed, new adoption, both virtually and in person. And I want to take a giant step back before we go any further, because I know we have people who are attending this webinar who maybe are not familiar with technology business research, and I want to explain the way we work, how we develop our analysis, so that when we share our predictions in a few minutes, you'll understand where we're coming from. And it's pretty much exactly what you see in the text here. We tap into multiple streams of information and intelligence. We start at the individual vendor level, trying to understand each company's strategy and then examining their performance, their financial performance and other metrics, and we sort of piece those two things together, the strategy and the performance. We talk to everybody we can. We gather as much primary information as possible to sort of shape our thinking, and then we're constantly testing our own analysis with our teammates and, of course, with our clients. So what we're going to do real quick now before we get to, again, the predictions is a quick polling question. So out of the following imperatives for IT services vendors and consultancies, which one will be most challenging in 2021? Is it going to be about talent? Is it going to be about proving value to clients? And by that, we really mean sort of being able to prove that these services, particularly consulting, are still valuable even for clients that are struggling financially, or clients that have been hit hardest by the pandemic. Partnering across a widening ecosystem, and really it's a challenge to partner differently in a post-pandemic world, or something else that we didn't think about. So hopefully everybody's had a chance to vote, and we'll get to those answers later on. So okay, we're going to go on to the predictions. We only have 3 of them, and these predictions are sort of framing up trends that we saw, the drivers that are behind those trends, and then the predictions we're making about those trends going into 2021. So here's the first one, and it's a continuation of the idea around hybrid, but getting a bit more specific about what that actually means for selling IT services and consulting and delivering IT services and consulting in what we're hoping for in this post-pandemic world. It's not obvious about how everyone had to shift to nearly 100% remote work and delivery. That was in March and in April and into May. But I think the ripple effects and the expected impacts from that over the long term are kind of worth sorting through. So for that, we're going to turn to Boz to go into greater depth on this. Boz?
Patrick, and thanks everyone for joining today. As Patrick alluded, I think the balancing act here between hybrid selling and hybrid delivery is something that vendors are striving towards as we move into 2021, and we anticipate that balance will continue even beyond the 2021. But what early results indicate is really about understanding how do you sell? How do you sell in a hybrid world, and when do you engage in what setting? We see a lot of the vendors that are really well established in execution and service delivery, that back-end support, like the India-centric vendors and the others that have really strong offshore base, are reaping some of the early benefits, which kind of looking at the buyer side of the equation really suggests that our buyers are less concerned about how the services are being sold to them, either face-to-face or via Zoom meeting. It's more importantly about to be executed properly with the consistent quality of service. So it's something that we are keeping a close eye on for, but the early concern about how vendors will sell, it feels like it's largely driven by vendors, by buyers looking for more of a execution consistency and quality of service, which if that continues, certainly will provide a really strong kind of a sweetener to the deals for a lot of those vendors that have really strong execution capabilities. As lower travel costs certainly helps to offset some of the cost of services associated with travel, SG&A expenses, so the operating structure has changed. And we've seen some really strong results in some of the India-centric vendors, someone like Infosys, for example, in the last couple of quarters. I mean, their on-site effort went to the lowest at record, 25%, usually hovering around 30%, and their margin is expanding significantly. At the same time, they have signed a tremendous amount of large outsourcing contracts. For the first 9 months of the fiscal year, they had about $12 billion in large contracts, and about $8 billion of those was in net new business, with a couple of mega deals, including the Daimler and with the Vanguard. So it's an indication again of vendors such as Infosys, which has really pivoted back to its core value proposition and really focused on the service supply side. That on-site face-to-face presence doesn't necessarily mean that you are it's a must-have to drive business. But obviously the caveat here is to make sure that the quality and really consistency is being executed on. So that's the kind of the balancing act that as we think about where do we see how vendors will sell. Obviously, there's vendors in that regards that some like the management consultancies could face some challenges, but they could be certainly looking for strategic partnerships with some of the India-centric vendors. On the buyer side, as we think about the execution part of the equation, what we saw from our voice of the customer research in terms of budget spent does not seem to budgets to be slowing down. Actually, budgets are being largely focused on really that, the cloud adoption, migration, modernization, and really focused on that execution part of the equation. So again, it's about balancing, and just because vendors don't have the opportunity to sell in person doesn't mean that leads to worse results. Actually, we're seeing vendors that actually, as long as they can execute well, they are performing really well. And I think John may have some additional color on some of like TCS to kind of contrast and compare it to Infosys here as well.
Yeah, thanks, Boz. So I'll use TCS as my backdrop here. And going back to the India-centrics and hybrid delivery, TCS is one example where we're seeing a vendor make a big bet on hybrid in the post-pandemic world. Last year, it announced that it's pursuing what it calls the Vision 25 by 25, being the goal of only requiring 25% of its workforce to actually work in a physical on-site location by 2025. It's a bit of a mouthful there, but compared to where it's at currently, which is 96%, working remotely, it can almost seem like a step backwards. But compared to peers that have labeled specific plans, again, assuming a post-pandemic world, and certainly compared to pre-pandemic, it's ambitious. And with that comes long-term questions about productivity, employee health, client engagement and satisfaction, and also culture, where, especially in environments in India where traditionally there's been a bigger sense of oversight between management and employees. So all of which have so far proven to progress pretty steadily, but it's been out of necessity during a pandemic. So it will remain mostly an experiment, assuming a post-pandemic world. But there's a number of reasons why India-centrics want to take advantage of a larger remote talent base, notably cost savings. But I think an important aspect that we haven't touched on yet is also, as TCS describes it, tapping into the talent cloud, which is essentially the global pool of resources available to TCS. And that's compelling because it would help TCS gain access to more resources in some of its core geographies like the U.S., outside of more densely populated metropolitan areas. And that's essentially enabling the cost benefits of rural and nearshoring, but it's also opening up more pathways for hiring in what's been an extremely competitive environment among India-centrics in recent years because of visa pressures and also because of client preferences for onshore support. And the latter is definitely shifting now because of the pandemic, especially with European clients. But what's important is that we're continuing to see indications that buyers, like Boz mentioned in the Voice of the Consumer, are still viewing outsourcers as having geographic and consulting skills gaps, thus pressuring India-centrics companies like TCS in their move up the stack, but it's also forcing them to continue investing heavily in readily available on-site resources and also advisory capabilities that can deliver in person. Of course, not right now, but this means that meeting face-to-face with clients and members of the partner network, including academia and startups, within delivery centers, innovation centers, this is still going to be a significant part of go-to-market strategies and is going to continue to act as a lever for growing talent pipelines and also generating up and cross-selling opportunities into the future. So far with TCS, there's no indications of plans to significantly consolidate physical assets and infrastructure despite their bold vision, but on the heels of reinvigorated hiring in these core markets, it's suggesting that hybrid is the way forward for many vendors. I think I'll hand it back over to Patrick as we begin to talk about emerging technology and trends and predictions.
Thanks, John. And I think it's really important to emphasize that what John and Boz just both did was approach all of this from a very vendor-centric lens, looking at individual vendors. And again, if you're not familiar with TBR, that's sort of how we do things. All right, this next prediction probably comes across as really painfully obvious when you read the headline. I mean, emerging tech means more complexity, means partnering smarter across the ecosystem, but there is a ton of nuance here. And so for this, we're going to shift now to Kevin Colopy and John Cossis. Kevin, you want to take it away first?
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. Appreciate that. And yeah, I'd just like to discuss a few things around the partnerships, alliances, and the evolving ecosystems. It's kind of already been alluded to by Patrick and Boz previously, but, first that really the ever-changing technology and the accelerated client adoption, of course, dampened a little bit in 2020, but that has really necessitated IT services vendors, historically outsourcing houses, app-focused companies, kind of think like mainframe, SAP, Oracle shops. They're really having to expand their capabilities into their, quote-unquote, anointed cloud kings, think AWS, Azure, Google, and really increasingly focus on the born-on-the-cloud players, Salesforce, ServiceNow, Workday, companies like that. So that's, one of the first big shifts that we've really been seeing over the last, few years, but over the last year, it's really started to pick up. And secondly, I kind of wanted to mention, with those drastic market changes, brought on by COVID, during 2020, we're also seeing acceleration in partnering across the IT landscape, really to drive or to help improve sales enablement. With in-person sales limited, as mentioned before, and seemingly on a downward general trajectory, and a lot of these IT services vendors are really already kind of fully utilize their upselling and cross-selling opportunities to their existing customers. Really, that next lowest hanging fruit is capitalizing on the partnerships to help attract new logos or to generate broader capabilities internally that they can then turn and upsell and cross-sell to their existing customers. I mean, it's really a two-way street, though. We're hearing from the hyperscalers that they're asking like how we can be easier to partner with, from the IT services, vendors, and along with those IT services players, asking how can we be more attractive to these same hyperscalers. It kind of gets to the second bullet there. All these amazing new technologies, they're really only valuable if they can be deployed and implemented and really used by clients, at the end clients by the employees. That's kind of where the sweet spot is, and that's really where those IT services players can kind of bring value. And that kind of brings me to my final thought. Due to the points, we discussed, we really anticipate that this trend of forming these close-knit, mutually beneficial partnerships between the services and the tech players is really going to accelerate in 2021. And, we think so much so that, we're currently trying to evaluate and figure a way that we can kind of capture these trends and find a way to productize it and, around these, partnerships, alliances, and the ecosystem shift overall, due to the importance that we think it's going to play in the overall market in the upcoming quarters and really years. We're currently developing an alliance matrix covering three selected IT services majors on really around their joint partnerships and joint practices with the three large public cloud players to start. Of course, this is a fluid framework. It's our first iteration. I just wanted to point out is one of the highlighted vendors was or is currently DXC. And, as we know, just a few weeks back, they received that buyout offer, which Atos later confirmed that $10 billion buyout offer. But kind of bringing it back to that partnership lens, DXC does bring some some established partnerships, and they've been making some big bets around the cloud players. Recently setting up joint practices with both Microsoft and AWS. Along with being really a market leader in ServiceNow deployments. Additionally, DXC brings a joint practice with a long-standing partnership with PwC, which helps DXC kind of fill those gaps in industry capabilities and adding advisory strengths. I'll go ahead and take a pause there. Evan Wollicott will go ahead and he'll talk a little bit more on this on slide, I think it's going to be slide 11 now, or the next slide, really from that cloud and software angle. But before we turn it over, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to John Costas that can kind of talk about partnerships and how they're evolving in the public sector.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kevin. As Kevin mentioned, I track the U.S. public sector, primarily the U.S. federal IT market, and I think there's an additional market dynamic at play here when it comes to partnerships. And in fact, we track the leading systems integrators in the space, and what we've observed is that because digital transformation of government infrastructures for mission effectiveness to enhance operational efficiencies, that's not going away at all. It's only going to accelerate, irrespective of the change of hands in Washington today. And what federal buyers want is they want more, and they want to tap into more commercial technologies. And while the federal systems integrators that they've been working with for years and years, they know the rules of engagement, they have a deep knowledge of agency mission objectives, they know how to navigate the procurement system. They have been slower to integrate into their solutions, into their platforms, many of the technologies that have been proven on the commercial side, and that has prompted many of them, at least the winners that we're observing, who are embracing not just commercial technologies, but more commercial ways of doing business as well. So in order to align with the increasing demand for commercially developed and commercially proven emerging tech, what we've observed is the systems integrators that we track, the top of the market folks, as well as their tier 2 counterparts, forming more direct relationships with many of these emerging tech firms in the form of direct partnerships or organizing events where they will bring together many small to medium partners that have niche solutions in specific areas that have applicability across the U.S. federal market, defense, intel, and the civilian space as well. The larger players, Leidos comes to mind, Booz Allen Hamilton comes to mind, embracing partnerships, greater collaboration with these commercial tech providers, and this really makes sense to us. As I mentioned, they know the larger players have to hold the hands, if you will, of their smaller counterparts and lead them through what can be a very onerous procurement process. And they know, as I mentioned, the rules of the game, and that's particularly important as there is set to be an ever-increasing volume of small business set-asides as we move forward, and as there's a greater embrace of emerging tech across the U.S. federal space. This is, I think, going to be particularly relevant in the areas such as cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, machine learning. So that's a quick view of what we've seen in the U.S. federal market. I'm going to hand things back to Patrick for the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, John. And so here's our third prediction. And I have to say, when we published our prediction special report back in December last month, less than an hour after the thing published, I got an email challenging whether industry clouds are really coming back. The answer is they are, and Evan's going to explain that. Boz is going to add some additional thoughts to Evan's point of view. And then we'll hear from Kelly, who's going to give us some of the implications for the management consultancies like the Big Four that come out of this reemergence of industry cloud. So, Evan, off to you.
Thanks, Patrick, and hello to everybody on the webinar today. As Patrick kind of alluded to, we did get some pushback at first when looking at this because, industry cloud is far from a new phenomenon. SAP kind of kicked it off dating back to 2014 with the marketing blitz, stating I think they wanted to go after like 25 industries with their industry cloud pursuits. But what we've kind of identified is there's a confluence of three factors which are kind of bringing it back to the forefront. And so the first kind of theme that we've noticed is from the customer angle. Dating back to that, the 2014 blitz, the maturity of the client's cloud deployments was, there was far less than it was today. At that time, the adoption was really focused on those front office suites, be it CRM or adjacent solutions and services like, a services cloud or chatbots, things of that nature. So very simple cloud-based functions that, allowed them to do more with what they had. Today, though, the front office adoption is very mature when it comes in terms of cloud, and enterprises are kind of beginning to shift more mission-critical functions, starting more so with the less risky capabilities, be it around talent, recruiting, or employee management, and then gradually targeting, the related capabilities, be it around payroll and financials, things that have a high degree of risk associated with transitioning them to cloud, and if the deployment, has a hiccup, so to speak, when you go live, it can create some pretty significant challenges for the organization. Obviously, they're consuming these solutions in a hybrid model as well, choosing to keep some of that more risky information on-premise while transitioning other elements to the public cloud, but having that ability to still access all the data from a unified platform to enable the outcomes they're trying to do. ERP, too, is beginning to become more readily consumed in the cloud, and this has obviously been, we'll say accelerated, so to speak, by the ambitions SAP has around S/4HANA, which is going to enable that intelligent enterprise vision. They're really trying to get everybody on board with this cloud-based model of how they consume their software. With this maturity, too, though, what we found is the clients are more frequently pursuing these industry-based solutions which address highly specific needs and pain points and then desired outcomes based off, the industry segment that they're working in. And to enable those for the clients, you can't take that one-size-fits-all approach, which, works for the majority of a CRM deployment. Obviously, there's customization across any deployment, but they're a much more horizontal one-size-fits-all solution. Recognizing this, and this is kind of the second factor, the cloud players, have begun to, obviously launch much more industry clouds, targeting industries like healthcare, where there's a strict data regulations, and they benefit from things like a pre-built data model to allow the client to, achieve faster time to value because they're able to reduce their risk, associated with, moving things like patient data to the cloud because they know they're compliant, the government's procedures are in place, they don't have to worry, and they can quickly do it. Outside of the risk mitigation is these industry clouds allow the cloud players to come forth with a more succinct go-to-market strategy. They can kind of foster these vertically based ecosystems around their platforms. And so a good example of this would be Salesforce and Microsoft's health clouds, which offer these pre-built integrations with some of the leading EHR platforms in the market today, like Epic and Cerner. That allows the client to, if they're already using Cerner, they can tie the data directly into their the deployment that they have with the cloud platform, and are able to achieve whatever the outcomes that they're trying to get to. In short, a more succinct go-to-market allows the ecosystems to be formed across the technology value chain to enable some of these more, vertically based use cases, which are being piloted increasingly across multiple industries and then resulting in eventual deployment, such as in areas like industrial IoT. The third factor kind of driving this change would be the IT services and consulting realm. Over the past year, there's been a significant amount of acquisitions around cloud services partners of these leading platforms, be it Microsoft, AWS, ServiceNow, and Workday. In addition to buying the partners, companies like Wipro and Cognizant are forming actual business units. Wipro just announced, I believe, 2 months ago, the formation of a 10,000 plus AWS unit, and then a year ago they announced a 10,000 or so unit based off Microsoft. So as they all pursue these opportunities around cloud migration, implementation, and the associated services, obviously the the competitive environment begins to heat up as they all vie for the same clients. Recognizing this, they need to differentiate, and so how do they do that? They need to increase their value to the cloud platform players who are now embracing more of this industry-based approach, and that kind of fits well with the domain experience that these IT services folks have. You know, they have the resources in the various verticals. They can tie them up to the platforms and kind of bring the cloud platforms deeper into the verticals and, you know, address the custom software needs, all of that, and they really understand the actual pain points of the users. So it's a strong value add to the partner, and it makes, or to the cloud partner, and it makes them, you know, more valuable in their eyes. And so we've already seen a good deal of activity on this front, and it was covered by the inaugural Innovation Centers report we published, I want to say 3 months ago now, in how the IT services folks are able to use an innovation center to bring the clients in, show them a business case, provide them with tangible proof points of what they can do with the solution, or just educate them on what is possible by, you know, providing a best practice of their peers in the market to kind of usher them along into a deployment. You know, in that report, there's obviously, we focused on some of the success criteria, the challenges, what to avoid in order to make that a successful engagement, because no client wants to come on site and just have you inundate them with marketing hype. They want you to show them what is possible and how you can help them get to where they're trying to go. As such, we're going to focus our research, so to speak, through 2021 on how the relationships between the cloud players and the IT services realm are going to kind of evolve moving forward. I mean, we've seen a lot of activity by the cloud platforms in regard to building out their services arms and consulting arms to kind of vie for more of that share and increase their relationship with the client. You know, Microsoft and Salesforce both poached executive talent directly from Accenture. Microsoft subsequently launched their cross-industry solutions consulting group in June, I want to say, and it allows them to kind of get closer to the client in that way. And so that's kind of going to be the focus going forward, is how is that, you know, as they start to compete for the same sort of share of wallet, how are the relationships going to need to evolve going forward?
Paul, do you want to jump in here?
Yes. I was just making sure Evan was all set. Yeah. So just to kind of add to what Evan was just talking about on how the ecosystem evolves and how services and cloud providers work with each other, but also, you know, kind of become more of a frenemy relationship. In a recent development, we saw Deloitte forming a strategic partnership with AWS professional service organizations. And I'm kind of emphasizing that latter part, professional services arm of AWS, which is it's a kind of a testimonial of like how those relationships we see starting to evolve and really trying to see how each side of the equation of the ecosystem will be playing within their own swim lane. So as part of that relationship, it's very much focused again on the industry. Those two will be targeting. The relationship is geared towards addressing public sector clients that are looking to modernize IT infrastructure, legacy infrastructure, a lot of mainframe work that has to kind of go into the cloud, and obviously AWS to become part of that transformation. So Deloitte will be very much really focused on that deep consulting industry knowledge, and they'll be pulling assets that they have been using for other modernization engagements from the Innovake IP that they acquired a few years ago to using Deloitte Cloud Transformation Lab, and really trying to set the stage of the conversation with the buyers in the public sector, where the AWS will be tapping into a little bit more on the architecture knowledge of the infrastructure and trying to go a little more into data analytics and AI type of tools that will enable more efficient, more effective way of migrating application workloads from, you know, legacy mainframe to cloud-based architecture. So it's just an example, and as Evan mentioned, you know, we have dove deeper into kind of the sort of the relationship as part of our digital transformation research, and we looked into those technology vendors, not just the hyperscalers, but also the technology like vendors like the Salesforce and SAP and Oracle, trying to better understand how their professional services arm evolve and how moving forward each party will start to balance in those relationships, especially as the pursuit for managed services budgets has been, it's increasing quite a bit. So that was kind of like a quick example. Just wanted to share of like two vendors that are typically going to market, sometimes may even look like they are competing on the surface, but forming such a strategic partnership, it's important to start kind of drawing the line in the sense of who's doing what and when for what purpose. And without turning it over to Kelly to finish the section with the management consultancies.
Thanks, Boz. Thank you. So in looking at some of the vendor partnerships that we've seen, before the pandemic, some of the management consulting vendors had shifted their partner ecosystem to be a bit more expansive, to be more inclusive, moving beyond their traditional set of partners. And that has accelerated throughout the pandemic as they're looking to forge relationships that help to address pandemic-related transformation needs, as well as help to advance their portfolios around cloud, automation, and even software. Combining the consulting expertise with the technology strengths served as a natural flow for a lot of the vendors. It strengthens their value proposition and really helps them to better address some of their clients' needs. There were three trends that I wanted to call out that will likely accelerate during 2021 in terms of partner ecosystems and how the consultancies are partnering. The first one is around co-development with partners. We've seen it so far throughout 2020. We thought, and it will expand as we move into 2021. Is the consultancies developing solutions, platforms, and products alongside their technology partners. One example is EY. They had co-developed some solutions with their technology partners through a industry-specific lens. So it helped them to create some automation and some blockchain solutions that helped their clients operate digitally and navigate some of the challenges that they had faced in the market. Deloitte similarly uses that industry lens, and they had partnered with some academic institutions, some startups, to really build out their industry-aligned solutions. So I think we'll see more of this as we move forward into 2021 as the vendors look to, following from the industry cloud, to develop some of those industry solutions or even technology solutions. The second trend is around the lack of exclusivity with partners. I think the vendors have kind of seen the need to partner with multiple different vendors and really maintain that broad ecosystem to create a variety of specializations, so to build out a resource network for multiple different areas. I think McKinsey has held this strategy quite a bit, creating a lot of partnerships without being exclusive to any one of them. And it does help the vendors to be more active in their relationship management and to accelerate their portfolio development and really accelerate their innovation. It also helps them to partner better with within their network and to partner around specific needs for their clients, so they can have more partnerships that are directly tied to their clients' needs. And lastly, around their technology partners to help maintain a broader set around the technology partners such as IBM, Microsoft, and Google, and it helps to lead into trust to some new buyers. One caveat there is to avoid creating competition as some of the consultancies are developing some platforms and software, they need to be mindful of their alliance partners and what types of relationships they're forging. The last trend I want to call out is around an increase in local and regional partners, as well as increasing their relationships with startup partners. As emerging technologies around 5G, edge computing, and AI and quantum are growing, many of the vendors are moving beyond their traditional partners they're deepening those relationships as well as moving on to some different, larger scale partners, as well as looking to some of the startup communities in different regions to help scale some of these areas. It also helps them to keep pace with some of the technology-centric investments and really keep their portfolio refreshed and renewed. In closing, we've definitely seen a lot of the vendors have been reevaluating their alliances, changing the nature of them, shifting who they're partnering with, and also looking to add more into their partnership than just into their partnership ecosystem, adding more than either just regional. They're expanding all over, looking for different industries and creating more specialized partnerships, which is helping them to really increase that value creation for their clients and address specific problems that are related to COVID in the now, and then hopefully post-pandemic they can shift into incorporating different industry-oriented capabilities. And with that, I'll hand it back to Patrick for digital framework.
Thank you, Kelly. And I think one thing important to understand is that while it may sound like so much is happening across the partner ecosystem that it's hard to pull out any kind of distinct strategies or any differentiation, I think we are seeing that, and we actually saw it before the pandemic hit, and our conversations, especially towards the beginning of last year, were all about what kind of changes the IT services vendors and the management consultancies were going to do in the way that they structure and carry out their partnerships with their technology vendors. So really critical. So we're done the predictions, but we want to give you a little bit of bonus content before we get to the Q&A, and just sort of a time check roadmap here. We're going to go over this slide. We're going to look at the poll results, and we're going to look at some of the reporting, the published report that supports everything we've been talking about, and then we'll go to Q&A. So we'll be there shortly. But we want to talk about right now some of the evolution that we're undergoing, the changes that we're bringing to the professional services and digital transformation practice in 2021. And specifically for digital transformation, we're going to pivot to a framework that very explicitly incorporates the technology value chain, industry lenses, and a real deeper understanding of the business value chain, with all of that providing the framework to understand the value of use cases, the driving forces behind different digital transformation personas. It's not enough to know the use case, you need to know what's sort of driving it throughout a company. And then, of course, how it's not digital transformation unless you change your business model. So what are those evolving business models? So I'm going to ask Evan to sort of flesh this out a little bit more and how this has been designed, and then have Boz talk a little bit about what the research deliverables are actually going to look like in 2021. So all you, Evan.
Thanks, Patrick. So, throughout this webinar, we've covered evolving trends across multiple topical areas. So, we've covered the ecosystem value chain, we've covered the vendor strategies, we've discussed a bit about the personas, the use cases, and so forth. In short, powering this digital economy we now all live in is multiple complex IT storylines, which have historically been viewed in silos. But to understand the implications of these emerging trends, be it technological changes, customer-centric forces, vendor-based forces, it requires thinking about them differently, which is why TBR intends to kind of use these frameworks of reducing that complexity that's inherent in this digital world with some of the planned research we have for 2021. So, these frameworks help us to develop content which kind of bridges the gap between the companies we cover, the technologies that fall within the ICT domain, and then obviously the customers who are, the ones consuming the solutions being put forth by the vendors. For instance, by identifying the core personas in a specific industries such as industrial, you can understand what the core needs, the pain points, and desired outcomes are of the users across the technology, and that's going to range across multiple lines of business. Am I on the factory floor? Am I, managing my supply chain? And how does the data from that factory floor impact what I'm doing on my supply chain? From there, you can kind of understand which use cases we would expect to lead in that industry, because the value of a solution is predicated on its ability to alleviate the leading challenges of the very users and obviously the enterprise, which is going to be deploying the solution. Without bringing in the customer angle to the solution development, vendors are going to run the risk of just developing technology in these echo chambers and just building technology for technology's sake. frankly, we kind of feel that's probably part of the reason why Microsoft and these other cloud players are starting to build out their consulting and service arms so that they can take the insights from these high-touch engagements with their clients and feed them back in through their R&D processes to add specific value around, say, their healthcare cloud that can now be resold across their broader customer base. Once these top use cases have been identified, you can then start to map out what the required value chain is needed to enable that use case. So, what do we mean by that? So, take an asset management use case in industrial. The factory floor contains hundreds, if not thousands, of pieces of equipment that are from different OEMs. They're transmitting vast volumes of data in real time back to that client, which may be carried out on a different networking protocol. They're using different connectivity providers, be it a telco, a cloud player. It's coming in on structured and unstructured data, and it needs to be then transformed to be able to, be made usable on the data platform, which is supporting numerous applications across numerous lines of business to enable those efficiencies that they're looking for. In this one small example, we've already identified numerous ecosystem participants who would be required in order to, fulfill this sort of use case. So, if I'm Microsoft in this instance, I now know I need to make sure that, these OEMs are going to tie onto my platform so that their data can be made usable on what I have. Additionally, it's not just about, technology partners. It's also about, partnering with folks who have that domain expertise. So over the past year, for instance, Microsoft announced numerous partnerships with Honeywell, Rockwell Automation, and Siemens, which is really exploring how can we take our technology from the Microsoft point of view, combine it with the solutions that these, industrial-specific providers have today to bring additional value to that client. But it's not one size fits all. So that's just the industrial lens. As you start to look across the industry spectrum, the needs, the pain points, the expected outcomes are vastly different by industry segment. The needs of industrial are much different than healthcare, where there's data regulations, so on and so forth. And so if you can, in sum, it's a way of taking a unified approach to how we're going to be able to create a compelling storyline around what's happening in a market and how clients need to evolve their ecosystems. They need to change how they're going to provide the outcomes to clients, and then begin to partner with folks who they may not have thought to partner with in the past. Given the challenges and the complexity of industrial IoT, that's part of the reason why we're choosing to use that as one of our initial topical areas to explore in 2021, in addition to blockchain. And with that, I'll turn it over to Boz, who will probably provide further color kind of on what that research agenda looks like across PSP and DBQ.
Thanks, Ivan. And yeah, as you kind of explore, just to kind of summarize from in terms of the digital transformation research, as you folks on the line probably are familiar with digital transformation research, or for those who are not, it's really a monthly publication across 5 different pillars. And that portfolio has been evolving over the last few years. In the current format, the way it is, has been over 2 years. We're making the next phase of that digital transformation portfolio. And the 5 pillars so far have been analytics, insights, digital marketing services, emerging technologies, voice of the customer, and cross-vendor report. So what we have seen and observed from the market, but also from a buyer's perspective, as well as vendors' investment strategies and so forth, the emerging technologies, we have looked into a number of emerging technologies, from quantum to 5G to IoT to edge to blockchain. So two stand out. Blockchain and IoT actually stand out as less of emerging status anymore. They're actually graduating and becoming more of a disruptive and technologies, and putting a little bit more tangible results and tangible outcomes of vendors and buyer strategies. So as what Evan just described will be how we start looking at that part of the portfolio, the emerging technologies portfolio. Now we'll be start looking at the two particular areas, blockchain and IoT, industrial IoT, and sort of the test bed of that new sort of quote-unquote framework or evolving framework as he described it. So we'll be, instead of just 4 publications of the emerging technology reports that were really kind of scratching the surface, so to speak, of the emerging technology because they were just that, they were emerging and there were not enough use cases or they were just too early of the investment cycle. We've identified that blockchain and IoT will have actually enough to go deep enough across those 3 dimensions, ecosystem, value chain, industry, and business value chain, and we'll be publishing on a semi-annual cadence more of a deep dive report of, that twice a year on blockchain, twice a year on IoT, where we'll take that lens of the framework Evan just described, and we'll provide some use cases. We'll talk about personas. We'll talk about how the ecosystem is intersecting and collaborating, and all through the lens, still through the lens of digital transformation, exactly answering the key questions of how our vendors' business models evolving and how essentially they are making money. So that doesn't change. It's more about some of the emerging technologies are kind of like, graduating and going a little bit deeper through the lens of that framework that Evan just described. With the long-term view that as we go through the TBR is that as we go into our kind of TBR digital transformation, through digital transformation, it will be easier to ingest, easier to understand for our buyers, and many of our reports will start like be tagged in a similar format down the road. And with that, we'll turn it over to Patrick for closing comments and poll results.
Thanks very much, Boz, and thanks, Evan, and everyone look forward to seeing this particular framework frequently throughout not only the digital transformation, but other parts of the portfolio. And so all of this does support the broad set of research we have underway. I want to show a couple things, but first we need the poll results, and here we go. So I'm super happy to see that none of the above was not an option for anybody. And I'm not too surprised by the proving value to clients. Maybe as a team we can talk about this a little bit after the Q&A, if anything jumped out as surprising to anybody. From my own experience in talking to IT services vendors and consultancies over the last year during this pandemic, it has really been about the partnering and making sure their clients really understand what value they're bringing at a time when budgets are so tightly constrained. So I do want to point out some of the reports. You can read here the underlying research and what we publish on these topics. And I want to emphasize a couple things. One, if you haven't read a TBR benchmark since maybe 2018 or even before that, they are different now. There's a greater emphasis on readability. They're not, massive, huge, thick Bibles full of information. They're a lot more easy to read, and there's more forward-looking analysis. There's less of the focus on, what exactly happened in a particular quarter, and more looking what are the implications of what happened for what's to come. Of course, the benchmarks still contain a ton of data. The other thing I want to emphasize, and you can see it here in the description of these reports, we are still absolutely centered on the vendors themselves. The bulk of our research starts at the individual vendor level and builds up to understand the larger market. And to me, this is a really critical, important distinction in our work, because when we're speaking with our clients about our analysis, as you heard for the last 53 minutes, we are often speaking at the individual company level with the analysts that are dedicated to understanding really just a handful of companies, but understanding them at great depth. So with that, let's go on to some Q&A. And the first question that we have here is, and there's still time if you have other, well, we may run out of time, but we'll try in the next 7 minutes. What do you see as the likely impacts of the Atos and DXC deal? It's a solid question, and we touched on it a little bit. We did do a special report on it when it happened. I think the day after the deal was or the rumors were confirmed by Atos, and it has been top of mind for a lot of our clients who called up asking, even clients among the big four saying, hey, what's going on with Atos? What do we need to know? So I would recommend reading that special report. But for a quick sort of sketch on that, maybe Kevin, you can take a pass at it. Kevin is our lead on DXC. And then maybe hear from Boz, who is our lead on Deloitte, and Kelly, who is our lead on EY, to sort of get their perspectives as well. So Kevin, you want to take a first cut?
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. Yeah, as Patrick mentioned, we kind of teased this previously in the presentation, if, which is still a big if, this goes through, having covered firms such as CSC, Dell, Legacy HP, EMC since, 2015, where there's smoke, there's fire. So often that big if turns into a when and who and really at what price. So as Patrick had mentioned, we did do a special report. It published on January 8th. Some of the numbers, the key numbers and facts and figures, from that. The combined companies would have estimated revenues based off of 2020 of about $31 billion, approximately $15.4 billion in IT outsourcing alone. This would place it as the second largest global IT services vendor, close in size to really Accenture at $45 billion in 2020, and larger than TCS, which was around $22 billion. So that alone really dramatically changes the peer landscape, and further down the road, it's going to be accelerated by the internal changes happening at IBM with their pending spinoff of IBM GTS. What does this mean to the vendors? In simple terms, Atos, it's going to get that scale and it's going to get, the desired U.S. revenues that it's really been striving for. DXC gets, another opportunity to kind of press that reset button. It's going to be a payday for its shareholders. Hopefully possibility of, long-term stability for DXC's, employees being inside of Atos. I can go ahead and hand it over to Boz and kind of see his thoughts and reactions on it too.
Sure. The Accenture and Deloitte, the two companies I cover, it will have a minimal impact on Accenture, in my opinion, mostly because the Atos and DXC's core business will be around ITO. That'll be half of their business combined. And ITO is the least area that Accenture is pursuing, investing, and so forth. Certainly, there might be some, opportunities possibly from application services space that both Atos and DXC may be bringing from their respective acquisitions of Syntel and Luxoft. But I think Accenture has a much more established footprint in certain industries within the application services space that, again, will be minimal disruption there. And so I don't think there will be much of a challenge to Accenture per se, just because of the business model. And on Deloitte side, I think that Deloitte should look into and consider potential, a little bit of a strategic partnership with, a potential new entity, unless somebody else has already taken that opportunity ahead of them, especially in the Big Four space, as all the Big Four are thinking and looking at how to partner better for managed services opportunities down the road. Kelly, or anybody else who wants to chime in?
Thanks, Boz. I just have a quick thought. Looking at it from a talent perspective, I think it could be a good thing in terms of DXC. I know Atos is a very strong talent management, talent training. I think they have a very strong program there, and it could really help to scale some of that talent and really shift them into different areas. But it could also be a struggle to bring all that talent on board and kind of mesh the cultures could present a challenge. I want to leave some time for the other questions as well.
Thanks, Glenn. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about the talent, and the way that Atos manages its talent is one of their biggest strengths. So, all right, I do want to answer two questions at once, and that's about getting a copy of this deck. You will be able to download the slides after the presentation is over. I will also say we did publish a special report back in December on this very topic that goes into detail on a lot of what we covered here. We have another question as well. Relative to the international GSIs and TCS in particular, with some of the potential for connectivity issues with home workers, will that have an impact on post-pandemic strategies? So from my perspective, the number one issue when the pandemic hit was safety, health and safety. The number two issue was connectivity, and then following very quickly after that was productivity. I think most of the IT services vendors and the consultancies have sort of worked out their own connectivity issues, but it's a great point to raise around whether or not it's sustainable, particularly I think as the way that the IT services vendors themselves measure productivity becomes a little bit less about, are my people, are they healthy and happy and getting the work done, and it's more about, are they getting the work done? I do want to ask John Kroll to step in here, though, because he covers TCS. John, some thoughts on this?
Thanks, Patrick. Yeah, really good question, and certainly something that I failed to mention in my original rundown was that not only are there no indications from TCS to consolidate its assets and its infrastructure, it's just the opposite, actually. In some cases, TCS is expanding, and this really plays into that hybrid focus. I know there's definitely some confusion in TCS's vision 25 by 25 and what they're really planning on doing. And it's certainly a mouthful to go through, but there's another thing that I didn't quite get to when describing it, which is that 25% workers that, one more try here. Workers can expect to spend no more than 25% of their time in the office. So I think that really shows the intent that they're not necessarily going to be removing 3/4 of their workforce from working in offices. It's going to be a hybrid approach, and so some of the things that they're doing to expand infrastructure will support that. A couple of examples recently include a delivery center in Austin, Texas. They're, I believe, constructing a massive technology city in India, and they're also planning to roll out some more of their paceports across the U.S. I believe there's only 2, and those are sort of their innovation centers where a culmination of partners and clients come together person to person. So those are going to be fueling a lot of their upselling strategies, and you need people to fill that role physically. So I think that, yes, there are going to be connectivity issues, but part of the solution to that is rolling out physical locations for workers to migrate to in case of problems like that. That's my thought there. Maybe, I'll turn it back if I think we have another question, but if anybody else wants to jump in on thoughts there, feel free.
Thanks, John. We do have other questions, but we are at this point over time. Thank you all for attending this. There's a survey you can take when you log out. Appreciate it if you do, and please feel free to reach out to any of the analysts that you heard from today, or contact me directly if you have any other questions. And I'm sure there's another TBR webinar next week on predictions from another part of the firm. Maybe it's telecoms, maybe it's cloud. Go to the website. You can see all the upcoming webinars, and you can look at and download and listen to replays of previous webinars. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Take care.